Okay. All right. Recording started. So, welcome everyone to the Logic Games info webinar. This is going to last about an hour long, and there will also be a recording sent afterwards. So, I'm just going to start with some preliminary stuff and then talk about the main subject, Logic Games. So, first of all, questions versus chat. There's a chat window. I'm not going to be looking at that. So if you have a question, use the questions function. This depends a bit on device, but there should be something that lets you ask a question. As far as like what questions to ask, if you have a question about the stuff that I'm talking about, like right now, or like immediately, then ask it as it's happening. If you just got like a general logic games question, then hold that towards the end of the session. So, because I can't answer that many questions as I'm going, but I'll get to more of them at the end. Okay, so, actually, one more thing. Score release, because I'm guessing this is sort of like a unusually tense time for those of you that took the LSAT in September. Scores are not out yet. They are scheduled to be officially released on the 20th, but they are normally released a couple days early at least, but they haven't been released today, as far as I know. Sometimes they're released as late as 7 p.m. Eastern, but I have not seen any news yet about them being released. So it'll be over soon. I know this is like a pretty tense time. And more to the point, if you're thinking about like signing up for the later Logic Games like seminar that I'm going to talk about a bit later on in the session, there should still be time to sign up for that after the scores are out. Because I expect they'll probably be released on the 19th. They've almost never released them on the official day. Okay, so what I'm going to cover tonight is the major mistakes people make in logic games, how to get better at logic games by repeating them, how to use explanations and how not to use them, and then how to deal with the new unusual games, and also rule substitution questions. And after that, I'm going to talk about a logic games mastery seminar that I'm running Thursday and Saturday. So basically, that's something. I'll just give like a brief description now. It'll be like, well, actually no. I'll save that description until later. I'll just say that I'm going to be giving a discount code for that as well, like later on in the webinar. So if you stick around for that, then you can get a discount. But I'll just start with the logic games info right now. And also, I've highlighted an article on my site that you can find it if you go to the Start Here page and scroll down. This one, step 3. There's the article on logic games, but I'm also going to just send the link in the chat. And this covers like a bunch of the information that's in the webinar as well. So I highly recommend reading it. But the thing that I'm especially going to show you tonight is this 2 diagram set up here. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to start with the major mistakes people make. And actually, I'll start by just talking about like what logic games are in general. So logic games are kind of like the most unusual section of the LSAT in that reading comprehension and logical reasoning are at least like pretty close to things that you've had to do in other bits of your life. They're different. Like normally you don't face language as precise as logical reasoning, and you never have to like think so clearly about text normally. It's normally more about like understanding the bigger ideas rather than the little details, but they're at least analogous to stuff you've done. Whereas unless you've done computer programming, you just probably haven't done anything like logic games. And actually, if you're watching this and like still have like time left in school and want to know like what course you could take to get better at the LSAT and logic games, probably computer programming would be pretty high up on the list. It's a very similar skill set. What they're testing in logic games is your short-term working memory ability, which means how well you can take a bunch of facts, hold them in your head, and work with them. And so this is pretty fundamentally different than most of the stuff that you have to do. It means logic games are less like studying for a major exam where you have to remember a whole bunch of different facts, and more like going to the grocery store and remembering to get everything. which seems funny because like everybody can buy groceries, right? Like it's not a very intellectually hard thing to do. Yet on the other hand, everyone can screw up groceries. I'm sure every single person listening to this webinar has at one point forgotten something they were supposed to get at the grocery store. And it's so simple. You're just supposed to get like 5 things that, when you went into the fridge to get the milk, you're like, God damn it, I've got no milk. And you're like, well, I'll get that at the store. And you come back and you didn't get the milk. You're like, well, how did I do that? It's because it's not remembering to buy the milk isn't testing your pure intellectual ability. It's testing, 1, your ability to hold things in your head at the same time, and 2, your ability to have a system to remember. For most people, that kind of a system would be a grocery list. And on logic games, diagramming is that system. So basically, with short-term working memory, that means the number of things you can hold in your head at the same time. We're not very good at this as humans. If you read the Wikipedia article on it, most humans can only hold 5 to 7 facts in their head at once. So that means, if you're just very, very good at this, you can still only hold 7 things in your head. And another interesting fact about short-term working memory is the closer to your limit you get, the worse you are at everything you do. So, if your only job is to go to the grocery store and get milk, you are not going to forget that. You had no other. I mean, I guess you could go in and get really distracted by something else and forget the milk, but it's pretty hard. You only had one job. If you have to remember 6 different things to get to the store, that's when you probably need a list. And if you have to remember to get 10 things, unless you have some kind of a mnemonic system, that's actually beyond the limits of normal human capacity. But when you're getting to 6, that's within human capacity, but it gets hard and you might forget something. This is the dilemma we face on logic games. Right, short-term working memory. Right, the other feature of it, the more that's used, the worse we get. They did an interesting study. There's an experiment where people were told to watch a basketball game, and they had to count they were given a job count the number of passes made. And so the people there were watching the game, just watching the number of passes. And then in the middle of the basketball game, a person in a gorilla suit walks into the middle of the game and just starts waving their arms around. And a shockingly high percentage of people did not notice the gorilla. This seems astonishing. In fact, I have trouble believing it myself, because I only saw this video after I already knew about it and I wasn't being told to count the passes, so of course I saw the gorilla. But apparently, they found that when people were given this other job to do, they did not spot it. Now, how does this all tie into logic games? Well, on logic games, you're given a bunch of things to do that bring you close to your working memory capacity. So on logic games, you're unusually vulnerable to really dumb mistakes, like not spotting a man in a gorilla suit or forgetting to get the milk. And just really dumb mistakes, or mistakes that when you look at them will seem dumb, or mistakes that you don't even notice that you're making because your brain is too full to think about them. So the number one problem and mistake people have on logic games actually is not realizing this about logic games, that you are really fallible. You're never going to mistake the color green, well, unless you're colorblind. You're not going to mistake the color green for the color red. But on logic games, you can make the equivalent of a mistake like that. So almost all the mistakes I'm going to talk about deal with not treating yourself as a very fallible computer that needs help doing games. And the biggest mistake, or at least the most common one, is not drawing on the page. So when you take logic games on the LSAT, and now I'm going to actually show something on my screen here. I think you can all see my screen. Yeah. These 2 pages, so page 1 has the setup and the question, the first question. These are blurred for copyright reasons. And then page 2 has all the questions. And what a lot of people do when they're practicing is they'll take a piece of scrap paper and make their drawings there, and leave this thing blank. This is bad for two reasons. One, it doesn't train you for test day, because on test day you don't get scrap paper. So it means you've been training for something that is not what you're going to be doing, and that will trip you up. The second reason has more to do with this short-term working memory thing that I was talking about. Basically, for the purposes of logic games, we're really stupid computers. I'm a really stupid computer. You're a really stupid computer. You're a computer that can't remember 4 or 5 simple rules. Like if you think about the computer or whatever device you're watching this on, it's keeping track of I'm going to embarrass myself with whatever number I pick, keeping track of like thousands, millions, billions of things at once right now. Trillions? I've no idea. Human numerical intuition doesn't go there. But it's correctly keeping track of a very large number of things to correctly display the information that I'm sending right now. We suck. We can only keep track of like 5 things and we're not good at it. So when you draw on scrap paper, you have like a visual tracking difference that takes up mental energy. I'm sure you've gotten distracted by like looking like, where did I put my pen? And then you're thinking about where do I find the pen? That's probably taking up like 30% of your brain power when you're doing that, if not more. When you're on logic games, if you've made so here's the page, if you made your drawing like over here and like, on some other piece of paper, and the question is up here, and you've got to go from down there to up there and make deductions, you're probably using 20 to 30% of your very limited short-term working memory processing power on looking for the question. Look at what I've done with the diagrams. So this down here below the questions is my main diagram. And then right beside the questions in small diagrams are my diagrams that I made for that question itself. So here, once I made the diagram that corresponded to this question, all I had to do was look right back and forth between the answers and the diagram to eliminate them. And this one like massively improves your speed because you've got like zero delay, not just in eye tracking, but in terms of like focusing your thoughts on it. And second, you're way more likely to be correct. Speed and correctness go hand in hand. If you have to like look down off to another sheet of paper or even down to the bottom of this page and up to a question, it's not going to take you that much time to glance back and forth, but your mental processing time is going to increase quite a bit once you go back and forth like that. So drawing things on a separate sheet of paper is one big mistake. The second one is not drawing things beside the questions. And so these are sort of the same mistake in that if you're using a separate sheet of paper, obviously you can't draw beside the questions. But also some people draw on the paper, but then they don't draw right beside it. For instance, so people, starting on prep test 66 is when the logic games switched to this 2-page format. And before that, there was like all these questions crammed on one page and people would be like, oh, there's like no space to draw. And it was a somewhat legitimate complaint in that there was like less space than you've now got to deal with. But now LSAT has given you too much space because a lot of people make all of their diagrams here on this second page. And when you're looking at this page, like with what I've got in focus here, you can't even see the question. You have to go find it again. And, going back and forth and back and forth, you're going to lose stuff. And it makes much more sense to learn and practice drawing your diagrams right beside the questions so there's no feedback time. Now I want to go back to something I said you're going to lose stuff. What I meant by that is very literal. Like I said, logic games are testing your ability to hold 5 or 6 facts in your head at once. This is like the pure limit of your short-term working memory capacity. You do not have any spare capacity. If you do something that eats into that capacity, you're going to drop some balls. And I have had students sit in front of me and show me logic games. And something very frustrating will happen. They will make a correct deduction. Then they will go look at the next step. Then they will make a deduction at that step. And they'll forget the first deduction that they made. Then they'll go back and be stalled or to think about the first deduction, and they'll make the first deduction again, and then they'll forget the second deduction. And most of this has to do with them like moving around the page and not having a good system for like writing deductions down. Anything you do that pushes your capacity when it doesn't need to is going to make you forget a rule, forget a deduction, forget where you are, slow down, and lose time and lose points. You need to be hyper obsessive about not doing anything that is mentally inefficient on logic games, because to a ridiculous degree, you can lose your deductive power from trivial things. I'm can't stress this point enough. If you wanted to like analogize it to a desk, it's like if every extra thing. I'm actually a messy desk person myself, but suppose for the purposes of like pure focus, it's probably better to have a clean desk and act like any little extra thing out of place dulls your focus enough that you will lose deductive power. So let's see. Now, said you should draw stuff on the page. I want to address two objections about that. One of them is, like I mentioned later on, repeating games, which is a good point. Like, if you're drawing these things on here, that you can't really repeat the game here. You could erase everything, but it'd be annoying. You'd probably see your marks. That is annoying. What you should do, though, is just before you do logic games from a book, make photocopies of the games in that book, or scan them to PDF so that you can print them again. If it's for your own use, I am pretty sure that's legal as far as like copyright law goes. And then once you have a PDF copy of it, you can just print it as many times as you want. This is how people used to do it back when LSAT allowed the legal sale of PDF logic games, which ended like relatively recently. So this was like the standard method. So I think like scanning them or taking a picture on your phone, they have like phone apps where you can take a picture and make it into a PDF and then you can print it. As long as you've bought the book, someone correct me if I'm wrong on this point. By the way, I'm seeing like a connect to audio thing. Can people still hear me? Just checking my internet. All right. Sorry about that. I had a connection issue. Can everybody hear me now? Yeah. Is sound up now? All right. I'm just going to keep talking. Let me know at which point you can start hearing me again. Good to go? Perfect. What was the last thing that I said that you could hear? Someone says their working memory sucks and they don't remember. Does anyone know? All right, so I was talking about PDF printing. Good, as much. Okay, so I believe I was saying one of the major objections people have about drawing diagrams on their page is they want to redo them, and they think they can't redo them if they draw on the page. So what I was recommending, I'm pretty sure, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's no copyright issue with making a personal copy of a portion of a work. I think it's covered under ownership or fair use laws. I might be wrong, but don't share the PDFs of what you make, but I think you can make a camera scanner app, scan to PDF, and print that, and then just use that to redo the games. You don't have to do this with every section. Realistically speaking, for logical reasoning, there's not that much that you have to draw on the page, and just erasing is probably fine. But for logic games, I definitely think everyone should make copies You can photocopy a bunch. That's also a viable method. You can scan them and print them. But make copies and then just use those copies. Don't use scrap paper, and don't just erase your stuff. Unless you find it really doesn't affect you. But I find when I see people's erase stuff, like I can see answers they circled, I can see diagrams, or they'll like erase the ink, and it's not great. All right, so the other objection about drawing stuff on the page, and more generally about drawing stuff like this, is people will say, I can't draw that small. There's not enough space. I need to like make space here. And I guess my answer to that is, well, like, look at mine. There was plenty of space for me to do it, and you can, I mean, I've got some pretty messy handwriting in some places, but you can generally read my stuff. I think this is one of those things where if you haven't been doing it, you know, the first time you do it, you're going to suck at it. I did not make like excellent logic games diagrams the first time I started making logic games diagrams. But if you practice doing stuff on the page and doing stuff by the questions this way, then you're going to get better at it. You're going to like intuitively learn how to make diagrams that are about the right size so that they fit, but you can still read them. And, you know, I'll also make diagrams like up here between these two fours. Is my screen sharing still on, by the way? Yeah. Up here between these two fours, just like anywhere around the questions. I generally leave this space blank. I'll make my main diagram here, make the other ones in these spaces. Right, so let me go through my list. Yeah, so two big things then were, I'll just recap. Practice your diagrams on the page, make photocopies, and treat yourself as a really, really terrible computer, which we all are as humans. We're just not very good at this. And assume that anything you do that takes up mental energy is making you not just a bit worse at logic games, but like significantly worse at logic games. On the level of, you know, what I just did there, where like I looked over at my notes and I thought like, okay, what do I have to talk about? And you could see how I paused and I had to think and I thought about what I was doing and I was mentally scanning like what's left on the list, what have I already talked about? And that took time. The difference is I'm not doing something that's like so challenging in my short-term working memory that I'm just going to collapse. Because I've already written down the stuff for the rest of the webinar. And the stuff at the start of the webinar is just like one section and I only have like 3 things. So this is something, but you still have it still slow me down, but I'm not risking failure. Logic games is harder than what I just did in your short-term working memory. And you already saw like that one brief thing I did was hard. So if you take one thing out of this tonight, it would be just treat yourself as a very bad computer and that any slight habit that you're doing that takes up mental processing power makes you drastically worse at logic games. All right, a couple of other like minor things that I've seen. One would be actually like adding too much detail and being kind of like too neat and fussy. And I'm just going to like show some drawings here. So like a really common one is, and your mileage may vary here, but I see people like a very common game like linear games will have like 6 slots like this. And people will go like that, which seems minor, but you saw that actually like doubled the time it took to make this drawing. And this comes up so often that I find by not drawing those numbers, I know immediately that like this is 5, this is 6, this is 3. I mean, I guess the normal thing would be 7, but the point still stands. You should always be kind of looking for details to remove if they're not necessary. Now, you got to remember this in context with the other advice. You want to have as many details as you need to make things clear, but no more. Especially for diagrams by the questions. Like, you know, if it's a main diagram, you can draw this if you'd like. For the ones by the questions, it's better to leave them off. I've seen some people, like I saw someone take a ruler, which you can't have any LSAT actually, but like they took a ruler and made like very clear columns for like a grouping game that had like spaces like this. What I do for that is I would just be like, there's my 3 groups. again, like the more you practice doing diagrams with fewer details, the better you get at reading them. Now, you don't have to, and if you want some examples of these, like just go to the explanation section of my site and review the games, even ones that like you did well on, and just kind of see like, what did I draw? The ones that I draw are pretty much like the ones I actually draw in real life. Though sometimes I add like a little bit more detail, like I add the numbers just for clarity. So even that I take off. Always try and cut it down to the minimum. And a good test you can use to see if you're doing this right is look at some diagrams you made like a week ago and see if you still understand them. Because a good diagram is something that should be fast and easy to draw, but yet still understandable when you look back at it. So you got like a standardized system and one that still makes sense to you in the past. When you look at what you did in the past. So if you don't understand your past diagrams, either your system's not standardized enough or you left out some details that you should have left. But if your diagrams are making sense to you after the fact, they were probably clear enough during the game. And I'm seeing some questions about this, so I'm just going to see what people say. No, I don't recommend putting the diagram. They asked, do I recommend putting the main diagram on both pages? No, I recommend putting it on the second page. I leave the first page blank. Because there's only one question on the first page, and that's best solved by just doing the rules. The last major mistake I find people make, last two of them actually, are not drawing diagrams fast enough and not knowing the rules. And these go together. You really ought to have the rules memorized as much as possible. The more you forget the rules, the worse you do at everything. So like 30 more seconds up front, memorizing the rules will save you like 2 minutes on the game. I find if I'm doing a game at the same time as a student, they often start doing the questions before me. But then I finish the game like 3 minutes earlier because I know the rules. I see people like just get stuck and I'm just like, thinking in my head like rule 5, because like they would get it if they knew that rule 5 existed, but because of the stress and the short-term working memory, they haven't got it. So you really want to know the rules so that you can just make what are really like often very obvious deductions if you know everything. Most of the times that a question is hard, not all the times, but most of the times that a question is hard is because you're just forgetting something. Like I said, we're very bad computers, and so it's normal to forget something. So you have to ask, like, what am I forgetting that makes this hard, and how do I not do that? But the other thing is like drawing fast diagrams. This is also something where practice comes into play. So, if you have a question that puts like P in slot 4, then you should be able to oops, I'm going too fast because I'm talking. You should be able to quickly a diagram like that and then think like, all right, if that makes Q go in slot 5, then you put that in. If that means you can't have T here. But just like, learn to quickly make a diagram like this when you're testing it for a question. Because I find some people take like 15 seconds to draw a test diagram when they should be able to do it in like 7. And the more you practice this, the better you get. And the more you know the rules, the faster you get. Probably the last mistake on this count is like not being confident enough in your diagrams. People will sometimes like have doubts even if they know everything. But if you know all the rules, then any diagram you draw that obeys those rules is allowed. So don't second guess yourself. It's like focus on knowing the rules so you don't have to second guess yourself. Okay. Let's see. Someone asks, do I write numbers when there's a lot of slots, like 8 or 9? I mean, if I think I'm going to get confused is when I would draw things. So it kind of depends on the context. Usually I don't, but it may vary. I'm thinking of actually like releasing as a product, like my own diagrams that I make. Like I make preliminary pencil pen drawings for these explanations, and I send them to an illustrator to make them for the stuff on my site. I'm thinking of like just scanning the explanation pages and selling them as a product because I think that might actually help people a lot to see what like I actually drew. But usually no. Do I have a general rule to make subdiagrams? So anytime a question says like, if X is in 5, what happens? I always make a diagram for that question. If it's just like a general must be true or a general could be true, it's going to depend more on the context. But usually like at least 60% of the questions on the game are like, if this happens, then what happens? And I always make a diagram for that. Someone asked, do I memorize the written rules or the version of the rules that I diagram, that I've written in notation form? Good question. I'm actually not sure. I think I just, through drawing the diagrams, I come to have memorized the effects of the written rules. Someone asked, how often do I draw not laws? This is a good question, coming to like efficiency. So not laws, I'll draw them if they're exceptional. Like say there's a thing like T must go later than sixth or later. So some people would draw like no T, no T, no T, no T. I find that confusing. What I would usually do is something like, I don't know, draw a line and put a T up there. So visually I see that T is like in one of these two spots. That to me is like mentally, and so here I see if I had this thing, then T would have to go to 7th because Q is already in 6th. That to me is clear, because if you get like there's some games where there's been like 20 not laws if you drew them all out, and that's just so confusing that it blows up your short-term working memory. All right, there's a couple other questions I'm going to leave till the end. I'm going to move on to the next section. So the single best method that I know for getting better at logic games is repeating them. You may have already heard this through seeing like 7 Sages video. I actually came across this like independently when I first started tutoring. It was during a period when like the only book of 10 questions was 10 prep tests was prep tests 29 to 38. There was like a long gap where the LSAT hadn't released any more books. So that meant students that was like the book everybody used. So they kept coming to me with questions from this book. And I kept seeing the same games over and over and over again that students asked me to explain. And so like I was just kind of like naturally good at the LSAT. Like what I mean is I got a high score, but I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of like a formula for diagrams. And it was like a mental struggle to do everything. After I tutored for a while, I actually got better at the test in the sense of being able to like have a system to explain what was going on, to make good diagrams and so on. And for me, so like even though I was getting a good score, I would say I got a lot better at logic games through repeating them with people, because that's what let me develop a system. Like the 4th or 5th time I would do a game with a student, I would start to notice like, oh, actually, like this is a faster way to do this. I could have saved time doing that. Or like, that's kind of like something I saw in this other game. Maybe there's a pattern. And you start to get an intuition for like common things that games do, efficient tricks, all kinds of stuff that you don't get if you just do a game a couple times. So like I said, photocopy, make PDFs, whatever, do games until you feel like you've got them down. And this includes the easy games. Because, if you've got a game that's like easy and you get everything right, but it takes you 9 minutes and, someone else could do it in 6, well, you're not as good as you could be. Those 3 minutes are ones you could use on a harder game. Or sometimes, you're just not going to figure out a question, but you can brute force it. Like this happens to me sometimes. I won't see the efficient method, but I'll brute force my way through a game. But in brute forcing, I have the time to do that because I was fast at everything else. The one common objection I get about repeating games, I'm just going to go back to this, by the way. The one common objection I get about repeating games is people say like, well, I remember the answers, I can't do it. I think there are 2 things going on here. One is when I'm repeating a game, like obviously I remember stuff, but what I'm trying to do when I repeat it is I'm trying to improve the process. I'm not just trying to remember the answer. When I repeat, I'm trying to get to the answer faster and more efficiently in the most efficient way possible. And I'm trying to disprove everything else. I'm trying to fully understand it. As long as you're aiming at that, I think you can still get a lot of benefit out of repeating games if you remember them. Some people also have like a very visual memory. If this applies to you, if you like, they've said they actually like remember the position of the answer and it really bugs them. Like my memory is not that visual. I don't see images in my head as clearly as other people do. If this applies to you, you could do a modified version of repeating games where you repeat them sort of like blind review, where you repeat them without checking the answers. This will be like a bit hard to do because you want to check the answers, but just don't know what the answers are. So you can't be sure that your past answers were correct. I guess this might imply actually like having some games that you don't check answers to for like a week. But I think there's some value in drilling games in this way. This could work if you find like visual memory of the answers is really interfering. Otherwise, I think just focusing on the process is enough. Okay, and then the next thing is about using explanations, which ties in very directly to repeating games. The most popular set of explanations for logic games is the ones by Seven Sage. People also use mine a fair bit, though actually less than my like logical reasoning or reading comp. I think like the video is a good format, and Seven Sage has that down. So, and this actually also ties into like the new unusual games. So I'm going to talk about this all as a group. I'll give a bit of history first. Before the Seven Sage videos came out, logic games were the hardest section. Right now, the conventional wisdom is that logic games are the easiest section to get better at, which I think is true. Back then, they were the hardest section. Why? Because to get access to like explanations of what was going on in the game, you would have had to like hire a tutor, and that would be prohibitively expensive for most people to get like a tutor to review every game with you. So most people just couldn't do that. But then when these video explanations came out, suddenly everyone could see exactly how to do the games. So you started getting a bunch of people that were getting like perfect scores on games. And the job of the LSAT is to rank people between like bad, good, very good, excellent, perfect. And if suddenly all of a sudden like 40% of the group is getting perfect, well, that breaks your ranking system. So I can't say for sure that this is what happened, but my theory is that LSAC noticed that too many people were getting perfect scores or near perfect on logic games. So recently they started introducing sort of like unusual games that are different from anything else. And that means if you've been learning how to do the game just by watching or reading explanations and like memorizing what people tell you to do, then you can do games that are exactly like the ones you've seen before, but you can't do a totally new one. So here's how I recommend using explanations to get around that. When you're still learning the ropes, when you're still getting like, 18 or less out of 23 on logic games, or you, for whatever reason, like you don't feel like you really know the techniques, use the explanations. But once you start getting like above 20, above 18, above 20, like, whatever metric you use where you feel like, yeah, I know these games pretty well, stop using the explanations. Stop looking at the Seven Sage videos, stop looking at the logic game section of my site, and just repeat the games on your own. What this will do is this will train you to think for yourself about how to do things that you haven't seen before. And, if you're scoring like 15 or less on logic games, then this doesn't apply to you yet, but keep it in mind for when you eventually do get there. The thing that really takes you to excellent on logic games is learning how to do well on something you've never seen before. That's how, like, when I first got better at games, nobody like showed me a method. I just had to work it out myself. And that's why I got so good at even the new ones that I haven't seen. So wean yourself off the explanations. Repeat a game until you've mastered it before you look at the explanation. Or if you try it like 5 times and you just like really don't get it, then yeah, you can have a look at it. But try and hold off using the explanations and only use them to kind of confirm if you got all the deductions. You need to start figuring out things on your own. So that's how you should repeat games. Repeat games, and once you get good enough at it, stop using the explanations. I'm going to talk a bit more about how to do like these unusual games. And actually, I'm just going to actually forget to make the discount code. I'm just going to make it now while I keep talking. So how to do the new unusual games. People, I think a lot. So actually, I'll talk about what they are for those of you who don't know. Since about, the test in the 70s mainly, like about every second LSAT, they'll introduce weird games that are just not like anything else that came before. Or they're like something that appeared on like LSAT number 7, like back in the early 90s. So that is obviously going to throw you for a loop if you are used to just doing rote memorization. All right, I've just made the discount code, so I'll send it after. Yeah, so when when you see these new games, yeah, so they're unusual. And what happens when people first see them is they often kind of panic because they think like, oh my god, I haven't seen this before. Did I like forget to study for something? What do I do? I don't know. And they'll freak themselves out. So the first step when you see a game that's totally different is not to do that. Instead, what you should think is, well, they've given a new unusual game, but they can't make this LSAT like significantly harder than any other LSAT. Um, they've got to score it to a curve. So this game can't be like beyond my abilities, and it's not. They're not. I've actually shown game sections with these unusual games to people that haven't studied, and they've generally found the unusual games to be among the easier ones because the difference is that the other ones, once you learn the techniques, you can do better. The unusual ones are just demanding different diagramming things, so that's why they seem harder, but they're actually not intrinsically hard. So just like basically remind yourself that it can't be that difficult. You're going to have to think about it. You're not guaranteed success, but it's not beyond your abilities due to the mere fact that it's unfamiliar. So that's the main thing. Just like pause, breathe, read stuff, and think about it. I mentioned I go slower at the start of logic games than students. That's what you should do. Like read about it, think how to represent it. There's like one game recently where you didn't even you didn't draw a diagram. It was one of the unusual ones. Like the best way to solve it was just to look at, they had like a little chart in the setup, and you just looked at the chart and thought about it. There was like nothing to draw, which is highly unusual for logic games. But the people that like realized like, oh, I don't have to draw anything, like were the ones that did the best on the game. So not panicking is one part. Training creativity is another part of doing better on games, and I already talked about that. That's where like you redo games without looking at the explanations, so you train how to do them without anyone telling you what to do. And then the final thing is to do older logic games. So there's like 78, soon to be 79 numbered LSATs out there right now. Typically, like people don't use LSATs 1 to 19 very much, with good reason. Like the test has changed, but those logic games are very good because they're still testing the same skill set, but they're different. They're just like kind of unusual. Like I did a logic games like from 1 to 10 once, and like they were strange. So if you print those out, like I wouldn't watch explanations for those at all until you've done them a bunch. Just like try them, repeat them until you've mastered those games, and then check the explanations. Like that's going to be the closest thing you can come to simulating these new unusual games. Does anyone have any questions about that? Oh, someone says the sound went out. Can everybody hear me? All right. Oh, so I just said like LSATs 1 to 19 for the older games. Someone asked, is it true that the older ones are more difficult? I wouldn't say more difficult necessarily. They're just different. If anything, the ones are probably more difficult now because I think people are preparing for the LSAT more than they used to. And the LSAT has to measure like the pool of people taking it against each other. So if everybody's preparing more, then the pool is better at the LSAT, so the LSAT has to get harder. So I think the older ones might be easier, but they're different. So you will find them harder when you first do them because you're not used to them. But that doesn't mean they're objectively harder. All right, this has been like 45 minutes. So I'm going to talk about the seminar that I'm doing on Thursday and Saturday, and then I'm going to go back and answer everybody's questions. So this has been kind of like a general info session where, actually, let me just send the link. Did everybody get the link? It's in the chat. So if you go to the chat, you'll see a link. Anyone not get it? Or did people get it? Okay, perfect. People got it. So basically what this is, so in this info seminar, this is just kind of like high-level strategic info. And actually, probably when I do the mastery seminar, well, I'll have to see if like the people that in it were also in this, because this is also like info that I was planning to put in the mastery seminar, because this is the information I just gave is like what I tell tutoring students, is what I do myself. These are like my best, these are the strategies I personally use. So I'm just going to go more in depth on the seminar day, where like today was just like high level stuff, but I haven't shown you any drawings. I haven't talked about game types. I haven't gotten into any of the like specifics of what to do. You know, I've said when you repeat games, there's like stuff you gain intuitions for. I haven't given any examples. So really what the like seminar itself is going to be is me going through like hard games from the major types and giving clear examples of like things you can do to do better at the games, and talking about all of the stuff that I talked about tonight with like concrete examples. Because it's one thing just to like, you know, like hear some stuff, but actually seeing it in practice is where you're going to be able to learn how to do this and get a better score. So what there will be is on Thursday, October 20th at 6 p.m. Eastern, there's going to be a 3 to 4 hour seminar where I'm going to give like a bit more basic strategy info. Though I think now, since I'm guessing almost everyone in the mastery seminar will have seen this, I'll probably not repeat this information again, or I'll do it in like very condensed form. And I'll just go straight into the games where like I walk through hard ones. I talk about the different game types, efficient diagram types to do on those, common pitfalls, and also talk about like specific question types, because there's different strategies for like how to efficiently do a must be true question versus a could be true versus a could be false. I didn't get a chance to do rule substitution questions tonight, though actually that's also something that's going to be easier to do with specific examples. I'm going to actually walk through some of those like unusual games that I talked about and show how to do them. And really go in depth in people's questions. And then there's a second session also included in this on the afternoon of October 22nd at 1 p.m. There's a Q&A afternoon where I'll take about like 3 or 4 hours and answer everybody's questions. And also like after the first webinar, I'm going to probably get some feedback about like other stuff people wanted to hear. So this will be like another day where I'll probably like talk a bit upfront as sort of like a follow-up to any issues that were raised during the first session. One other person says they can't hear. I'm guessing everyone can hear me since no one else had said so, but let me know. And I've actually like put this in 3 different packages. Like the main thing here is $250. Though actually I'm going to send it now a 20% discount code. So webinar 20. I'm just going to test that and make sure that it works. I sent it in the chat. So if you go on buy now and then click there, click apply coupon. Let me just click apply coupon. It'll take off 20%, which is $50 off. So everyone get the coupon. Webinar 20 is that. So that'll get you $20 off any of these actually. The second one is the Logic Games Mastery Seminar and the seminar plus a course. So you probably have seen on my site, I made a full course for the LSAT, so including like logic games, logical reasoning, reading comprehension, general test day strategies, like everything. A 35-hour course that normally costs $400. So if you get it with this, and actually get it with a discount code, it's like a significant discount compared to the usual price. It basically amounts to like just a little over $400 for the seminar plus the course if you use a discount code, compared to $400 for the course itself. So that's a really good deal. And the last one is seminar, course, and personal consult, which is basically tutoring. And what I would do there, I mean, we could talk about anything, but I framed it as like a Logic Games consult. So if you ask me about like Logic Games tutoring, what I would do is I would have you like take some photos of some of your diagrams and send them to me. And I'll be able to give you like an evaluation of your diagramming style and stuff I notice that might be costing you points and how you can improve. And watch you go through some games and give you tips on what you could do better. And I think like doing tutoring after having already done this seminar will be probably more effective than regular tutoring, because you already have seen like all of my Logic Games advice myself, which means I don't have to take time during the lesson to like explain my methods. I can just watch your methods and give feedback. One other thing to mention about this seminar, just like this webinar itself, there's going to be a recording. So if you can't make any part of it or some part of it, you'll still be able to watch it after the fact with a recording, and you can ask me follow-up questions. Pardon me. Does anyone have any questions about this seminar? I'm just trying to think if I left stuff off. Oh yeah, I will mention like prereqs. So this is intended as kind of like an advanced Logic Game Strategies seminar. I don't mean you need to have like be scoring a 20 out of 22 in a section to get a benefit from it. But I'm not going to go over like really basic stuff. So I'm expecting people in this to have done like at least 10 Logic Game sections, to be familiar with like common diagramming conventions. To be clear, I'm still going to show like how I diagram, but I'm not going to go like super slow in explaining like the really basic stuff. You can still watch the seminar if you are like just beginning, but just know that I'm aiming this at like intermediate to advanced students, and I'm not going to slow down on the basics. Someone asks, do we have to purchase our own prep tests? Yes. So I haven't like LSAT licensing got really complicated for displaying questions. Basically, all you can do is show them in a video. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to send out a list. I'm still working on the list of what I'm going to talk about, either like late tonight or sometime tomorrow during the day. I'm going to send out a list of the games I'm planning to be covering. You should expect them to be from tests 52 and upwards. So basically for the LSAT, there's two main books that I think everybody should have. They're LSAT Prep Test 52 to 61 and LSAT Prep Test 62 to 71. I'm probably going to take everything from these, with the exception of some of the unusual games, where I may have to do one of the very newest tests, because that's just where they are. And I wouldn't worry about like this spoiling a test. The logic games are one of the sections that's like best to repeat. But if you haven't done a test yet, what you could do is just like, I'll be giving a warning on when I'm talking about it. You could just skip that section of the webinar for like that one game. And then just after you do the test, you could watch the recording of the webinar to see. So what I mean is I might be doing like test 76 or 77. Those logic games, like there's a game from in there that's unusual. Maybe I would do that one. You could just skip that and watch the webinar after you'd already done the test. And the same would apply to like any game that you're saving for like a time test. But basically, if you don't have these books, like get a copy of them. You can get them usually at any bookstore, or on Amazon will have like 1-day shipping. Like these are pretty much essential books to have for LSAT studies. Test 52 to 61, test 62 to 71. It's also a good idea to have all the prep tests like from 72 upwards. But these are where I'm going to take the bulk of the tests from, because I know people have those books. And if you're missing like one prep test, like I wouldn't let that like put you off the seminar, because you can always just skip out on that section and check it in the recording after. I'm going to be doing tests from or things from different tests, so you should be able to follow along. I will talk about rule substitution a little bit later tonight. I'm just going to finish this first. Someone's been asking about that. Anyone else have questions about this? And I want to talk a little bit the goal of logic games mastery. Because people often focus on logical reasoning because it has the most points, or reading comp because maybe they're missing the most from there. But logic games is really the easiest section to get better at. And you should always focus on the easiest points. That's why the first seminar of the series that I'm doing is on logic games, because I think that's where people can make the biggest gains. So even if you're only getting 5 questions wrong, you should still focus on them because those are going to be the easiest 5 questions to get. The other thing you want to do for logic games is you want to aim to be a bit more than perfect. So a lot of people will get to -0, -1, but then on test day they'll find a hard game and they'll get -5 and they'll miss their target score. What you want to aim for is getting perfect on logic games with 3 to 5 minutes to spare. This is also doable for most people. Once if you get to the point where you're getting perfect, you can probably get to the point where you're getting perfect and ending early. That gives you a buffer. If a game is unusually hard, you can still do fine just by taking up some of that extra time. Someone asked, are these seminars only for LG? I'm likely going to be doing one for LR, and I'm probably going to pick more specific topics and do shorter one-day ones as well. I did one on LSAT test day strategies before the September test, and just that was a 1 to 2 hour, I think it was 2-hour session that went quite well. So just logic games for now, but I will likely be announcing more. Since the test scores haven't come back yet, I'm expecting more people to be studying later on. So this is kind of a test run when things are still kind of quiet before the scores are back. I wanted to see how much demand there is for it now, even a low period. So I figured this would be the most popular thing because it's the most useful to take. And then once there's more people studying, I'm going to kind of ask people what topics do they want seminars on, and may pick other topics then. But this is the one that I knew there'd be the most demand for, even in this time of kind of a low period before retaking scores are at. I'll be right back. Oh, good. Some people have signed up. So I'm really looking forward to this seminar on Thursday and Saturday because it's the first time I've gone really in depth on games in terms of specific types, all what was I saying? Being able to talk about the strategy I just talked about in the context of a bunch of specific games together. But I'm just going to round things off now. If people have more questions about the seminar, then just ask. The 20% discount code will be good for at least tonight. Well, basically up until Thursday, so you can still use it then. And again, if you can't make it, there will be recordings. But I'm just going to go to other questions people asked. So rule substitution. Basically, my number one advice for this is enter the following search in Google. And you can see what I'm doing in the address bar up here. site:/lsatx.com, and then type the words rule substitution. Actually, I'm just there. Enter that. This is the command to make Google search only a specific site. This will find you all the explanations I've given for rule substitution questions. So you can just kind of make a list of these, and I'm just sending this link to people. You can kind of just make a list of these and do those games. And what you want to do really, like rule substitution questions aren't that hard. They're not very common. So you can't get practice at them. They're hard because you haven't got repeat practice. If you saw 10 of them in a row, you would swiftly start to see the patterns. It's not seeing the patterns that makes them hard. So if you like make a list of the rule substitution questions that I've explained, then see which games you've already done. Then just like redo those games, just like do the setup, do the rule substitution question, read the explanation. Then do the next game, do the same thing, and start to see the pattern, basically. But the gist of them is, let me just see if I've like actually got here. Yeah. So this is what rule substitution questions are supposed to do. They're supposed to allow everything allowed by the old rule and ban or forbid everything forbidden by the old rule. A lot of people, this can let you eliminate a lot of answers. If an answer allows something it shouldn't allow, it's wrong. I mean, in terms of like all the rules too, not just the rule in question. And if something forbids something that should normally be allowed, it's also wrong. So you can eliminate, one way to solve rule substitution is just to eliminate answers. The other way to solve them is to look at the full effects of the rule. Say you've got a rule that's something like this, like, I don't know, y has to be immediately before p, which I would draw like this. And let's say there's another rule that says like y is before r. Well, what does this tell you? That tells you why p has to be before r. How would you substitute the rule? There's no way to do it but just by mentioning y and r. You have to like take another variable, like p. If you said p is before r, then that would have the effect of making y before r. This is a really simple example, but if you just like see what other rules affect the rule in question, and then look at the answers that mention the variables from those other rules, you can often find the answer just by considering the full effects of the rule and thinking about what other variables might be able to interact. But then, just like go through the questions in sequence on games you've already done so that you can quickly see like 5 to 10 rule substitution questions in a row, and then read my explanations, and you'll start to get an intuition for the patterns. Okay, I'm just going to go through the other questions here. Someone says, do you normally write out the contrapositives? Again, it depends. I find a lot of students are kind of shaky on contrapositives, so like they won't always naturally get them. If that's the case, then you should definitely write them out. But eventually you may reach a point where you can just sort of like see the contrapositive in your head. Like, I'm just going to erase this. Say I have like A's are C's. I can, in my head, I can see not C arrow, not A. Like I just see that. So if you can just see that in your head, then I wouldn't bother drawing it. If you can't see it in your head, or you sometimes make mistakes, then do draw it. And if there's a longer chain like A, arrow, C, like for an in-out grouping game, like A, C, D, not F, I can't reverse that in my head as easily. I might draw the whole thing there. Someone asks, do you recommend diagramming all possible scenarios when setting up a game? I usually don't. If a game can be split cleanly into 2 scenarios, like if something's like T is either 4th or 5th, then I find that usually creates like a good scenario to split on, and I'll draw both of those. But if it's more than 2, I usually don't. I'll just focus on knowing the rules. Someone says, do you find... Oh, no, sorry, same question. Someone says, do you ever use the main diagram for IND questions? What do you mean by IND questions? Oh, local rules. No, I generally don't use the main diagram. I draw a new diagram by the question and I draw the rule. Yep, I always draw new diagrams beside the question. This is why like I practice doing it and I make versions that have like less detail on them so I can draw them quickly. Someone says if you finish with extra time, how do you decide which questions to go back and check? Good question. One, I'll actually often skip a question during a game, and then before I finish the game, I'll go back and solve it while my mind's still on that game. As for deciding what to check, if there's just a question that I had I spent a long time doing it, or I remember like subjectively, I'm not sure about my deductions, I would mark it, then I would go back and check that. So you have to kind of get a sense of when you know like this is the right answer, and I know it's right, and I know I'm generally right about when I'm right, which is kind of tricky. But some people are like, I got this, I understand it, it's right, and then they're wrong. So you have to kind of like keep track of like when you think you're right and you're actually wrong, and like fix that. So make it so that when you think you're right, and when you're not sure you're right, you are aware of that. Like I have a very good sense of when I'm right, and the way I know that I'm right is that I know the rules and I prove something using the rules. So it really comes down to like knowing the rules, actually. But yeah, basically cultivate a sense of when you should have doubts about a question, circle it, and then come back to those ones. Uh, oh, um, so someone asked if I ever write out the variables on a question I'm solving. Sometimes, so meaning like all the like 6 people in the game or something. On some questions where it's kind of like an elimination scenario, I will write out like all the people and cross out the ones that I've used. I don't commonly do that though. Usually, my diagram will sort of have the variables listed like on it because there are rules involving them, and so I just use those. Okay, it seems to be everybody's questions, so I will call that a wrap for tonight. There'll be a recording sent a bit later. Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed it, and remember that there's a 20% discount code for the Logic Games seminar. webinar 20, and you can sign up at the link in the chat, which is this one here, lsatx.com/LG Mastery Seminar. And good luck with Logic Games.